very serious news out of the East Coast area that I need to let you all know about. And I want to make sure I get these facts right, so I am going to be reading here. Turns out a former Charles County school assistant, which I believe this is in Maryland, who officials said is HIV positive and accused of sexually victimizing 42 juveniles, has pleaded guilty. This is according to officials. Charles County officials said 30-year-old Carlos Bell pleaded guilty to 27 counts of sexual abuse of a minor, along with a slew of other serious crimes after being indicted on 206 charges. So authorities held a press conference earlier today on that, and I'm going to show it to you now.
For this announcement, joining me today are Sheriff Troy Barry, Mr. Tony Covington from the State's Attorney's Office, Dr. Kimberly Hill, Superintendent of the Charles County Public Schools. Also here are Sarah Freeman from the State's Attorney's Office, Detective George Higgs from the Special Victims Unit, Lieutenant Don Stahl from the Criminal Investigations Division. To begin, you'll hear from Mr. Tony Covington, our State's Attorney. He will be followed by Sheriff Troy Barry, after which Dr. Kimberly Hill will say a few words, and then we'll take some questions. Thank you. Tony.
Thanks, Lieutenant Salas. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody coming out today. I know it was kind of short notice, but that's the nature of these things when you have a plea that's agreed to on the morning of. We are here to announce that there has been a plea in the Carlos D'Angelo Bell case here in Charles County. He has pled to 27 counts of the latest indictment, totaling number of maximum years 294 years. There is an agreement that he will be sentenced to no more than 190 years. So I want to get that out of the way right off the bat. Before I get into any further details, let me thank some people. Obviously, Sheriff Barry and their work, and in particular, where's Detective Higgs? Detective George Higgs, who was the lead detective on this, and Lieutenant Don Stahl out of CID as well. Want to thank them. Y'all really can't imagine what had to be gone through as far as investigating this case and going through hours upon hours upon hours of the type of video nobody ever wants to see because you can't unsee it. And not just that, interviewing witnesses, victims running all around, and Detective Higgs, and if I might say, this is nothing unusual for Detective Higgs. That's the type of job that he does all the time. So I really want to appreciate him. Likewise, I have got to talk about Assistant State's Attorney Sarah Freeman of my office. You know, I assigned myself to this case to try it as well, but she's the one who did all the work. I just get to take credit for some stuff. That's the, rank has its privilege sometimes. Sarah was in on this thing from the very beginning, helped Detective Higgs and the Sheriff's Office all throughout this thing. And again, I don't want to see the types of videos that we have here. Unfortunately, Ms. Freeman had to do that dirty work, and that's no fun. So they did a great job. Also, even though they weren't able to be here today, I have got to give great credit to Lieutenant Kale of the Maryland State Police and Sergeant Jenkins of the Maryland State Police. They're the individuals in the crime lab who sat there and did the hard work of finding the evidence that we needed in this case. It's all been talked about before, but I can't thank them enough. And unfortunately, they weren't able to be down here coming all the way where they did on such short notice. So let me get back to this plea agreement and the plea that was actually done today at noon in Charles County Circuit Court in front of Judge Amy Burgunyer. There are, as I said, 27 counts. There are 8 different categories for that. Sexual abuse of a minor, second-degree sex offense by force, third-degree sex offense, attempted transmission of the HIV virus, second-degree assault, filming child pornography, solicitation of a minor, and displaying obscene matter to a minor. Those are the 8 counts, the 8 categories that we have. There is a sentencing date that has been set. That is March 28th, 2018, again in the Circuit Court. Between now and then, a pre-sentence investigation along with a psychosexual mental evaluation, will be done on the defendant, and that'll be available to the judge when sentencing takes place. Also, as you are aware, there are some federal charges out there that pertain to Mr. Bell and his activities. My understanding is that he will be entering a plea of guilty on the 23rd of January. The counts that he will be pleading to there do not overlap with the counts that we have here in Charles County. My understanding is at some point in time they'll take him up there, he'll plead, then he'll come back down here, he'll be sentenced down here, and then go back up to the federal, up to Greenbelt for sentencing at some later date. I have no idea what that date will be as far as sentencing is concerned. You know, we had when I got this case, I really had two goals when we saw the magnitude of what was going on here. And that was to ensure that the court had the opportunity to sentence Carlos Bell to a life in jail. There's no death penalty in Maryland anymore. There's not a life without parole for these types of charges. So we had to have enough years where, realistically, if he's sentenced to the maximum sentence under this agreement, 190 years, the likelihood is that he will be in jail for the rest of his life. And that was one of our goals. The other goal, just as important, probably more important, quite frankly, was maintaining the privacy and, frankly, the anonymity of the young victims in this case. As you all know, every criminal trial is open to the public. We have any trial, one of these youngsters is going to have to get on the stand in front of the whole world and testify. None of you would want to do it. They wouldn't want to do it either. I'm not saying that nobody was cooperative, because they were. But we tried to fashion an agreement that alleviated that, and we were able to do so. And again, keeping the exposure there for a significant sentence of Mr. Bell. I also need to thank, before I yield to the sheriff here, I need to thank the Charles County Public School Superintendent, Ms. Hill, Dr. Hill, who's here. I'm blocking her. That's okay. She's here. Throughout this entire process, we had nothing but cooperation as far as this investigation was concerned. The cooperation from Dr. Hill and her staff, obviously Sheriff's Office, Maryland State Police, all resulted in this plea agreement today. All right? So let me yield to Sheriff Berry, and I'll come back if you have any questions.
Good evening, and thank you for covering this announcement today. This past June, we learned of a horrific details of what Carlos Bell was doing to young people in our school system. And it hurts our heart, it hurt our community, and it hurt this county. In fact, I've been an officer in this county for 25 years, and this is perhaps one of the most horrendous crimes I've ever seen. Carlos Bell was in a position of trust of our young people, and he misused that trust to violate the most vulnerable people in our community, our children. Thanks to the outstanding work of Detective George Higgs, as well as our Special Victims Unit, our Criminal Investigative Division, and our school resource officers, and many other staff played a vital role in bringing forth the necessary evidence to bring this case to a successful closure. I also, again, would like to thank Mr. Tony Covington of the State's Attorney's Office, Superintendent Dr. Kimberly Hill, the Charles County Public Schools, the Maryland State Police Forensics Crime Unit, the FBI, and all others who work side by side with us to put this case together and to bring it to court. I am thankful today that Carlos Bell paid for his crime and will never have an opportunity to victimize another child in this community or any other community. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We are thankful that a plea agreement has been reached between the Charles County State's Attorney's Office and Carlos Bell, a former Charles County Public Schools employee. This plea agreement holds Mr. Bell accountable for his actions without a trial, which could have caused further trauma to the victims, of many of whom are our students. We have cooperated fully with the Charles County State's Attorney's Office as well as the Charles County Sheriff's Office throughout this investigation. I am so thankful for both of these agencies and the work they have done to close this case and to ensure that this individual is held accountable for his actions. Since learning of the charges against Mr. Bell, we have focused on supporting the students affected by his actions. The school system continues to work with the Center for Children to provide that support and the further training for our staff. We in Charles County Public Schools remain committed to ensuring that every student is able to learn in a healthy and safe environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. I'm sorry, did we pass out the summary? Can we do that? We have a little table, summary table for you to show exactly what the pleas were. I'm sorry about that. I should have got that out earlier. I'm here for any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So the indictment was more than 200.
206 counts, yes.
And obviously a lot less that he's pleading guilty to. Does that mean that there had to be a big compromise in order to get this agreement? You know, people looking at to go from a couple hundred charges to 27, what does that actually mean in terms of getting this agreement? Is that what you needed to do to get this agreement done? And were there certain charges and allegations that you had to dismiss for lack of proof?
To the last part of your question, no. We had proof on everything. If you want to say it's a compromise, I suppose, but nothing that I felt we had to do just to get the plea. I wanted, again, to make sure there was enough years that the judge had to make sure he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. So I hear what you're saying, but quite frankly, in criminal cases, it's typical in any plea agreement that most of the charges, quite frankly, go away. So in a lot of cases, you have what we call lesser included offenses where, for instance, you have a robbery, somebody's going to plead to robbery. Well, the assault charge that's also there and the theft charge is also there. They go away. So it isn't indicative that somebody had to be beat down or this, that, and the other. Quite frankly, the agreement is essentially the offer that we started out with. So, and, yes, sir.
Personally, how disgusting was this to you personally? This whole case.
We still have sentencing to do, so the work isn't over yet. And because of that, I'll try to be circumspect in my response. I've not dealt with, and I've been doing this for 26 years now, something like that. I know, I don't look that old. Thank you. I've never seen anything this vile. I've not seen. I just haven't seen it, and hope to God never see it again.
What did the victim, as you said, you're doing this to ensure that the victim's anonymity and just make sure he's never out of prison. I'm assuming you've spoken about this with the victims and their families. What is their response to your decision to go ahead with this plea deal?
Well, everyone we've spoken with, and yes, we have talked to the families of all the victims in this matter that we can identify anyway. They also, their main interest is not having to have their children put on the stand. So they understand it. And as far as I know, nobody has said that they have any problem with it. They were aware that this was the offer, and that was just agreed to today. So, you know, you have to imagine if it was your child, you wouldn't necessarily want that child up there. So we certainly understood their feelings on that.
I know throughout this case you were asking for families and victims to come forward. Did you guys ever have a final victim count?
Well. Let me leave that to the sheriff on that because that's the investigative side of it.
Well, I would defer to Detective Hicks. What was the final count on the victims?
34.
34 victims.
That's identified.
Identified.
That's identified.
How many unidentified?
42.
But it had to be
42 not total, just including the unidentified?
Correct.
okay.
And at this point, every one of the victims has still tested negative for HIV, correct?
We have not been advised by anybody that anyone has tested positive.
And what's the age range between the victims?
11 to up to 17 at the time of the events.
11 to 17 when the events.
Right, when the events took place, right. Obviously, they're older now.
Can I ask, there were marijuana charges within the indictment?
Those were all dismissed.
They were all dismissed?
Yes.
Can I ask Detective Hicks, can you talk about how you tracked him down? I know initially the texts that were coming in were from an unidentified number. It was difficult to figure out who that was. Can you talk about the process a little bit in the beginning?
You want to? You can go ahead and talk about it in general.
So the person we were contacted by, excuse me,
reached out to us, the juvenile reached out to us, or his parents reached out to us, and there were suspicious text messages on his phone, and they were inappropriate to be sent into a juvenile. The parents suspected it was not another juvenile sending these. So we used the information on that juvenile's phone to figure out who was sending the messages, because it was there's a lot of ways nowadays to send messages from fictitious emails, phone numbers. So investigation started with his phone, led us back to Mr. Bell.
But I'm right in my investigation of your investigation that it wasn't as simple as looking up the number and his number was part of it. I mean, this was a multi-layered.
It was very multi-layered. You're right. It's not as simple as getting the number or email address the message came from and making a phone call to get the information. That's correct. It's multi-layered, and it actually sometimes leads back to IP addresses, and then you have to contact who owns the IP address, and they send you to someone else, and you end up back to a person or a legitimate address or a legitimate name. Because nowadays you don't have to use real names to do a lot of things. So.
During your all discussions to come to this plea agreement,
I wanted to add on something that Detective Hicks just said. To his point about how multi-layered it was, being the state's attorney, I'm the one who has to make this decision. We did not have enough evidence saying this is in fact Carlos Bell on that particular case until well into the search of the other electronics, where we finally were able to come up with enough evidence to say, yes, we're confident that if we put this in front of a jury, they would say he was the one sending that text message. So that's how multi-layered it was. I'm sorry.
During the course of your discussions to come to this plea agreement, did Bell ever say anything about this crime? Did he ever show any remorse at all?
I've not spoken with Mr. Bell. Been in the same courtroom with him. That's it. No, we're not sitting at a table negotiating with him. That's law and order stuff, not the real world. All I can say is I've not seen any sign of remorse when he's been in court. But that's me, and that's my opinion.
The additional charges to come out after the first indictment, is there any indication that after you collected the initial electronics that he then went out and purchased more electronics? Or was it just a matter of going through the evidence and more charges being added?
He absolutely purchased other items that were collected later on.
After the December warrant?
Yeah, we don't know exactly when he purchased it. Well, you know when exactly he purchased?
After the December warrant.
Yeah.
But he knew he was being investigated and...
Absolutely.
Dr. Hill, can you point to anything within the school system, any change that's been made, as a direct result? In the past we've reported, people want to see training, there's a lawsuit that's been filed. Is there anything that's specifically been done to try to find these people before they're able to hurt someone, or to try to figure out if they're in the system or prevent them from getting in the system?
We have multiple layers of things that we do to make sure that the adults who are working with our children are appropriate to work with children. Criminal background checks and things like that are automatic when it comes to the hiring process. What we have added on since then, since the Bell case, is that we've worked together with the Center for Children here in Charles County to provide nationally recognized training for all of our staff members, not just teachers, not just principals, but every person who works in a school has been afforded the opportunity to receive this training, this nationally recognized training, to help them recognize signs of a predator amongst them. We don't know that we'll ever be able to circumvent something like this every single time, but certainly we are taking every precaution that we can to make sure that our employees are aware of the signs. The second thing that we've done is that we have reviewed our curriculum at the elementary, middle, and high school level to help our students recognize what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Because in many cases, as I've learned from working with Sheriff Barry and State's Attorney Covington, these folks who prey on children befriend them and become trusted people in their world, not just in the child's world, but in the family's world. So we've taken a close look at our curriculum to help to make sure that we're providing kids with the most up-to-date tools that we can for them to be able to recognize when something may not be just right.
What is the status of that letter of lawsuit from the Tucker and Moore law firm?
I don't have any information further than that they have instituted a lawsuit, and that's it. at this point.
Can you talk about security, if there's been any security changes? I know after Mr. Bell was told that he was not supposed to be on your grounds or have any contact with children, he was doing that anyway, according to the documents. So can you talk about if there's been any changes as far as the property, monitoring the property, not just the staff?
You know, a school district our size, about 27,000 students, 36 campuses, and the ability to lock down all of that area is really kind of difficult to do. What we did with Mr. Bell is that we gave him a no trespass order for all Charles County Public School properties, and then as soon as someone reported to us that he was seen, then we could follow up on that and let our employees know, you know, if you see this person or that person. And he's not the only person that we've ever done a no trespass order on. But that's the kind of thing, that we do to try to ensure that once we tell an individual you're not permitted to be near kids on our property, that they aren't.
During the course of this investigation, has anything come to light where an employee might have known or something was reported to a school district employee about improper behavior on Bell's part?
None.
There's no one that...
All right, everybody. This was a press conference earlier today in Charles County, Maryland. Pilar Arias here with you. I'm going to stick with this for just a little bit if you stay with me here. So this came from Fox 5 DC. So here he is, the man they've been talking about this whole time. I'm going to read just some of the highlights here for you. A former Charles County school assistant who officials said is HIV positive, accused of sexually victimizing 42 juveniles, has pleaded guilty, according to officials. 30-year-old Carlos Bell pleaded guilty to 27 counts of sexual abuse of a minor, along with a slew of other serious crimes after being indicted on 206 charges. He will be sentenced to 190 years in prisons, authorities stated. Authorities stated Bell sexually abused his victims at Benjamin Stoddard Middle School at his home and possibly at other locations between May 2015 and June 2017. They say he sexually assaulted students while not wearing protection. That's according to police. Officials said the ages of the victims ranged from 11 to 17. The state attorney general's office said they were not aware of any of the victims testing positive for HIV as of October. So obviously authorities out there very happy that they could reach a plea deal with Bell, and that's because they didn't want some of the victims to have to take the stand in his trials.